for discussion.
Okay. I think we should start. Hello, my name is Eleanor. I am a member of the steering group and part of and a co-founder of Sisters of Freedom. We're sorry for the late start, but we were figuring how to pin the BSL interpreters on for the recording, as well as anybody else who needed here. Unless I'm mistaken, Sara, Louise might need BSL. Just because I know she has done some blog for us in which we use BSL. So basically, Sisters of Freedom, we sort of started in the early 2010, and then we became CIC, Community Interest Company, because we decided not to be a charity. And from then we have been involved with international events, such as going to Geneva for CEDAW, which stands for the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, I think, against women, and also for the CRPD, Committee for the People with Disabilities. Apart from that, we've done a few workshops specifically on the voices and leadership of disabled women, which were funded, because Sisters of Freedom is not funded. We're entirely run by volunteers. We have been recently funded for a report on the impact of COVID-19 on disabled women on their independent living. Before that, we did a briefing on that, and it's from that briefing that we asked for funding to do a bigger report. And I should maybe here thank Naomi Jacobs for giving a lot of help for that briefing. That was this year when we published that report, and I hope that you have access to it. If not, send us an email, or you can look it up on the Sisters of Freedom website. I think basically for this event, what we want to do is to come together and talk about the solidarity of disabled women. Why do we need a disabled women's organization or collective? And we have here today, very luckily, and we're grateful to 3 speakers. Although Carmen and Virginia happen to be in the UK at the moment, but Virginia is from Women Enabled International, which is based in the USA, and they, Women's Enabled International, have helped us, and we have co-written CEDAW reports, shadow reports, with us. And we've had collaboration that has gone back quite a bit. In the year 2016, I think, we also went to New York for the Committee for the Status of Women. And also Carmen, who is, I'm sure they will give you their own bios later, is originally from Hong Kong. She's currently lecturing at Greenwich University, so it's not that far in London. And Marley is the furthest one away, if I can say that. She's in Australia, and it's very late at night for her, and we're very grateful because she has had a really hard day, stressful day. She's in the process of moving. So shall I then start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves? Oh, I forgot that Lani, who's also part of Sisters of Frida steering group director, will be also in the panel, and that we're very sorry, but Rachel O'Brien is not feeling well enough to join us for this session. Can I start with Virginia? Would you?
Yes, of course.
Yourself, please.
Thank you so much. First, my name is Virginia Ossana. I am a disabled woman from Argentina. So I am like in different, across the, like living across countries, because I do work for Women Enabled International, as Eleanor mentioned. Women Enabled is an organization that works at the intersection of gender and disability to advance rights of women and girls with disabilities worldwide. And I am currently based in Warwickshire in the UK. I also had to move during the pandemic, so I know what you're going through. It is very tough. But we're together, we're here. So that's what matters. And I also wanted to say that I am so very grateful for the invitation to participate and be here today and be sharing this space with such wonderful women. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope we have a very interesting and enriching conversation.
Marley, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Eleanor. For any vision impaired folks, my name is Marley and I have shoulder length brown hair. I'm wearing a white jumper and I have pale skin. So my name is Marley and I'm a current policy and project officer at Women with Disabilities Australia, which we refer to as WIDA as an abbreviation. And WIDA is the national disabled people's organisation for women with disabilities across Australia. And we participate in systemic human rights advocacy. So we do a lot of government submissions. We also have participated in a lot of the CEDAW processes that Eleanor was talking about. And we're very firmly a membership-based organisation. So we also have recently received more government funding, which has been really nice to do a lot of projects with women with disabilities across Australia in regards to leadership. So we have run a blog for women with disabilities. We recently ran an art competition. We're running mentorship programs as well as peer networking events. And I guess the other big piece of work that's happening in Australia right now is that our government announced, it was in 2019, a royal commission, which is like a quite official process into the neglect, abuse and exploitation of people with disability across Australia. So that process lasts for around 4 to 5 years, and it's like a very legal process in which there's public hearings, hearing from witnesses, both people with disabilities, their carers, families, as well as disability service providers, about the experiences of people with disability. So WIDA has been supporting women with disabilities to share their experiences of gender-based violence as disabled women, as well as the very specific forms of violence that we experience, including reproductive coercion and restriction, such as forced abortion and forced sterilisation, that unfortunately is still very common in Australia, even though it is in contravention of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. But yeah, so that's me. Apart from that, in my own kind of grassroots capacity, I'm also involved in the Disability Justice Network of Australia, which is a network predominantly led by multiply marginalised disabled folks. So First Nations people, working class people, queer people, people of colour, all with disabilities. And we do a lot of mutual aid fundraising for each other to help each other survive in what is a very stressful time.
Yeah, Carmen, could you be next on? I'm taking the point from Rona. However, we're talking to people internationally, and they often use people with disabilities or women with disabilities. I take your point though that in the UK we use disabled, but we're not going into that right now because this is an international roundtable at the moment. I'm sorry, maybe I should have said that, but we have to respect other people's views when they're not in the UK, or their organizations are not in the UK. Carmen, could you be next, please?
Okay, so thank you so much for having me here. My name is Carmen Yau, and so right now I am in London as a lecturer in University of Greenwich. Before I relocate to UK, I'm basically located, I live in Hong Kong, and I am still the chairperson of Association of Women with Disabilities, Hong Kong. And for the past 5 years, we've been doing a lot of work that included to support other disabled sisters and disabled women in Taiwan, Beijing, or China to form their own little community among disabled women. So for the past couple of years, we got new organizations in Beijing as a sisters group, and we do have another organization like affiliate one as a sisters organization in Taiwan. So basically, for the past couple of years, what we've been doing is we are looking at research and different direct services that will look into equality for disabled women in terms of their motherhood, their medical care, as well as housing issues, as well as their physical and mental health. So in Hong Kong, what we did for 2 years ago, we do an all-round physical and mental health assessment for disabled women, for example, including medical checkup, and as well as we have professional ones who will look into their nutrition and the healthcare and other different kind of recreations as well as their sports needs. So we've been looking at all these sort of things, and the other things that we've been doing is we're trying to enhance motherhood and as well as a different kind of childcare for among disabled women. And the other things that we've been doing a lot of research is particularly on the interpersonal violence, domestic violence or sexual harassment, not only in our physical life, but also looking into the virtual community. And so that is basically what I do. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds great. I should have mentioned that Sister Safrida, we have a framework of intersectionality, and we look at intersections. In England, it's called protected characteristics, but we won't go into that. So we look at, yeah, I don't think I need to explain what intersectionality in this particular forum. I'm sure you all know about it. And I can add that all three of you I know are very aware of this and have this strongly in your capacity, or in your roles. When we started, we said that we won't be prescriptive. So I think what we wanted to talk about is our similarities and why, across the world, we try to get disabled women from other parts of the world as well, but it's not so easy, particularly with the time zones as much as anything else. And how our lived experience is also important. So I was wondering, in thinking in terms of intersectionality, how has that influenced your organization as well as yourselves? And also, I know, because I've been contacted by Women's Enable International, that you are thinking of building, apparently you don't have something similar to Sister Safrida, which is completely run and owned by disabled women. So maybe one of you can start by telling us about that, kind of why it's important to have a disabled women's organization, and how has intersectionality affected the way your organizations work. Virginia? Sorry,
Yes.
I keep picking.
Sure, that's fine. Well, Women Enabled International was founded by Stephanie Ortaleva. Some of you may know her. And she's our founder, and I think she was a visionary in what she, in her seeing a gap in, there wasn't an organization that focused on the intersection of gender and disability at a global level at the time. And when she founded us, Women Enabled was the first organization. I think it is still the only one that works at a global level. And I think it is so important to focus at this intersection and to have our voices at the table. Because it's not only a matter of like the big political decisions that we might see at an international level, but it's also like the small parts when we have a chance to say what we think and to create this kind of community spaces. I think it's just so important to be able to say what we want, what we need, and to have our voices heard. So, and I think Women Enable has been creating these spaces since its creation, and it continues to do so. And referring to your mention of Women Enable not having kind of a like something similar to Sisters of Frida, yes, that is that's a new project that Women Enable is taking on, and I think you're referring to Janie's US organizing project. So that project in particular, that is not a project that I'm involved in. That is one of my colleagues, Janie Mejias. That project is aiming at creating a movement of disabled women across the US, because Women Enable has worked at a global level, but not specifically in the US before. That has not been a focus of ours, even though we're based there. So this new project aims at creating an alliance of women with disabilities in the US in particular. And at a personal level, I think you also asked at a personal level, right? Or, okay, great. It took me personally, it was quite a journey to describe myself and to come to terms with the disabled identity. For me, I was first involved in women's movements. In particular, I was very involved with the right to abortion, and I was very involved with the right to abortion in Argentina, my home country, which has legalized abortion only last year. And I was very involved in, you know, that movement building and that advocacy, but I hadn't until my early 20s began to think about what was my place in the feminist movement for me, and how, like, what place I took there, and what was my role in advocating for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I discovered that there wasn't a disability perspective to it. And I said, like, this can't happen. And I remember there's a story I always tell of something that happened to me once, that I went to a march for the legalization of abortion back in Argentina, and it was super crowded there. And I asked the person who was standing next to me if they could make some room, because I use crutches and I needed some more space for my crutches. And they said, like, what are you doing here? Like, what did you come if you know it was going to be like this? And that was such a horrible, but also enlightening moment, because I said, you know, I belong here too. I am a woman too. And so then, you know, kind of the pieces starting falling together. And then I joined, things happened in my life. I went to grad school and then joined Women Enabled. And I said, okay, this is what I want to be doing. I found the organization that works at that specific intersection. And they had just released, I remember back at the time, the framing doc on abortion and disability. And I actually reached out to them asking about if they had a translation into Spanish of that document, because I wanted to share it with my disabled friends from Argentina. And that's how our relationship began, because I was trying to look for something at that intersection, at abortion and disability, sexual and reproductive health and rights and disability. A framing document, sorry, I'm looking at a comment on the chat box. Basically it's a report. That's an internal word that we use, a framing doc. It's a report on abortion and disability. I will share it in the chat box in a moment. But yeah, I think that is how, like, my personal experience and WI's kind of came to meet each other. And I think it's very illustrative of why that intersection is important, because we are women too. That's the key issue. Women with disabilities are women too, and we need to have our voices heard and our needs met.
Thank you, Virginia. Great to hear that, and also the perspective from Latin America, not just the US. Maybe we could go to Mali next. And it'd be great if you can also talk about the work with the other minorities in Australia. I know you touch on that. That would be, great for us to hear what you're doing in Australia with the other grassroots organizations.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Eleanor. Where to begin? So I think the way that WIDA formed is actually, I think it was in 1981 when the UN declared the Year of People with Disability. And there was a delegation of disabled representatives from Australia that was sent, and it was funded by the government, and it was all men. There was not a single disabled woman at all. And so older women in the movement came together and formed our organization because they realized there was, the need for our specific issues to be represented, not only within the disability space, but like Virginia was saying as well, like to bring that disability perspective to the women's movement as well. So that's kind of how WIDA came to be. And how I came to WIDA as a disabled woman, in my early teens, I was diagnosed with several different autoinflammatory diseases, and they were very disabling. But I didn't come to identify as a disabled woman until my early 20s, which is when my mum also acquired disabilities, and we both encountered a lot of medical violence within the healthcare system in Australia. And it became very clear to me the way in which society was creating all these barriers for us and was depriving us of the care and the healthcare that we needed. So that's kind of how I came to identify as a disabled person. In Australia as well, we do a lot of work around First Nations people with disability. So I'm a First Nations woman, I'm a Wiradjuri woman. And increasingly, we're trying to look at the way in which structures of settler colonialism are disabling and continue to be disabling in Australia. I'm not sure if everyone is across the history of Australia, but it's very violent. Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments now, Rona. Can you please elaborate on the medical violence you encountered? Where to begin? For myself in particular, I think a lot of the time it was invalidation. I was just fat, I was just lazy, there was nothing wrong with me, I'm a hypochondriac, and it took me the better part of 10 years to actually get treatment. So only around a month ago, I started on a biologic therapy, which I waited a really long time for because doctors didn't believe me, and when they did, they didn't really care. And that was the same for my mum. She actually died of medical negligence. She lived with quadriplegia, and we took her death to the Australian Human Rights Commission. So I think, our experiences of medical violence were definitely very defining for us. But back to what I was saying before. So in Australia, we also have another organisation called FPDN, First People's Disability Network, that is kind of working at the intersections of First Nations people with disability. I'm thinking of other examples of intersectionality in Wida's work as well. I think, as all good things, a lot of the change in Wida has been driven by young women and non-binary people with disabilities. So a couple of years ago, Wida established a youth network, and the youth network pushed really hard for Wida to become more inclusive of non-binary folks and other gender diverse folks, acknowledging that, you know, the way gender interacts with disability isn't just limited to being a woman. There are other ways in which gender diverse folks experience, you know, gender-based violence, essentially. So Wida recently changed our working definition. So Women with Disabilities Australia is the peak organisation that represents women, girls, feminine identifying and non-binary people with disability. And I know that this is an ongoing discussion across all of the women's movement. And I'd be really keen to hear how your organisations are becoming more inclusive in this regard as well. But that's something that's very near and dear to Wida's heart, is making sure that we are inclusive of, all people with disabilities who experience gender-based oppression. But yeah, there's definitely more work to be done. Like, I will not say that Wida is perfect, especially when it comes to engaging with women of colour, in particular refugee and migrant communities. Like, this is a huge issue in Australia. Systemic racism, particularly around our immigration system. So Australia has a very oppressive immigration system, and a lot of the time people's visa status can be denied and people can be deported purely for having a disability, and the fact that the Australian government doesn't want to pay for the healthcare and support needs of people with disability. And a lot of the time too, refugee or migrant people with disability who are living on bridging visas aren't eligible for essential healthcare under Australia's universal healthcare system called Medicare. Australia recently introduced a new disability support scheme called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and refugee and migrant folk aren't eligible for the NDIS, as well as incarcerated people. So we know women with disabilities living in Australia's prisons don't have access to essential disability support. So these are all really huge issues that, you know, increasingly we're trying to speak up about. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I should say that Wida is impressive in that it is one of the biggest disabled people's organization in Australia. Am I right?
Yes. So we have around 5 kind of peak disabled organizations in Australia. We have People with Disabilities Australia, Women with Disabilities Australia, First Peoples Disability Network, the National Ethnic Disability Alliance, as well as Children and Young People with Disability, and then the Australian Disability Federation of Organisations. So yeah.
And we can talk about the non-binary issue later on, because I know that Women's Enable is quite strong on that, and definitely we at Sisters of Frida are making a point that we are also inclusive of non-binary people. Carmen, last but not least, could you give us a perspective from where you are?
I mean, thank you so much again for the opportunity. I think right from my start, I think I'm a person with a genetic disease. So basically, I grew up with disabilities. I grew up in institution, and that is very common in Asia. When disabled children, they are usually live in institution, what we call a special school, and sometimes they do have boarding. I mean, boarding accommodations and different kind of healthcare and support. And that is where I come from. But actually, when I started to recognize intersectionality, it started when I studied my social work. And what I found is before I studied social work, I just think disabled women are just disabled. I don't really see the gender identity, and I don't see the challenges of being women with disabilities. It seems simply like the part of being women is being erased, and the kind of what I call as the genderless, or I mean, actually, that's what I look at. I mean, when I'm studying my master and I look at the children or the young girls in my community, and they are still being the same. I mean, like having very boyish haircut, trying to cover up their gender expressions and things like that. Because in Asia, what we often think that the best way of protection for disabled women is to cover up their gender or to their gender expression. So that is a very big, I mean, to me, it was a very big shock when I started studying social work, and I found that disabled women are being they can't see the gender. And so that's the reason why I started to do more work on intersectionality, especially to serve more as a disabled women advocate in Asia. I think we have a lot of commonalities in terms of we're doing a lot on disability and gender mainstreaming from two different communities. So considering in the disability community, they don't really see gender, they don't see women issue. That's why they never really look at disabled women have higher chance of being domestic violence or having problems with employment or poverty issues, because they just think that disabled women share the same challenges as any other members in the disabled community. So the identity that we are here is to be, having this gender and disability community is to bridge the information and knowledge that we have, and that is our uniqueness. To me, that is our uniqueness. We are informing the disabled community, and we are also informing the women community about disabled women, and we're bridging two communities. So going back to what we've been doing, I mean, for me, I think in the disabled community, we've been doing a lot of more work specifically on gender, how disabled women are being treated unequally and how our rights are being ignored in the disabled community. So at the same time, we also look at women, I mean, in women community, I still remember when they, arranged their campaigns, their events, their conferences, they never think of accessibility, And I think Virginia had that experience as well, that the families doesn't really recognize that it's essential to have our voices. And that is also important that is also important, and that is our commonality, that we need to show up to see our existence. And I think it's important that the persistence of showing up is important, because 2 years ago, when the women community in Hong Kong, they started to do an advocate to set up one-stop sexual violence in E&A unit in hospitals. And actually, we made a lot of contribution in this area because we provide a lot more information of enhancing these women's these women help stations to be more accessible so that they can accommodate women from different parts. So that is, this is our uniqueness. Somehow they don't understand us, but at the same time, in the other side of the coin, that we are actually the knowledge, I would say we are the knowledge portal that bridges both language. And I think that is the reason why we need to be here to be an advocate as a disabled women, because we are very unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Now, we've all run a bit, but I think we could have about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll have a break before breakout. Rona has a question about, I think it was about violence. Let me look at the chat again. Rona's question was on medical violence for...
Yeah, I believe that question was already answered because it was spotted and it was answered already. And I will say that that similar practices go on all over the world, and they certainly go on in America, where I used to live, in the UK where I'm living now. And I think you just need to be your own advocate and just be very kind of politely assertive about your own healthcare, and if necessary, go to get a second opinion, possibly a third opinion, and look into alternative treatments if you get to the point where the the medical profession is not acknowledging your situation. I lived with a spinal disability for 18 years before going to a chiropractor who diagnosed 75 pinch nerves in my spine and slightly broken neck and spinal fixations, and I lived with that for 18 years whilst the medical profession was telling me there was nothing wrong with me. So you basically need to be your own best advocate and go find the appropriate diagnosis for your condition, and then go from there.
Carmen, you had your hand up.
Yes, I would like to also echo with medical violence, and I want to bring up something that actually we all need to have a thought about. It is I'm not sure if anyone know that actually there are some medical treatment for disabilities that would actually affect specifically on disabled women. For example, the treatment for MS, if some of you know, actually the treatment of MS will lead to a problem if the disabled woman who is under the treatment, and she have higher chance of having disformed babies. And that is already in the newspaper in Hong Kong. That is also part of the things that we are looking at. And so I want to kind of react to when we talk about medical violence, actually we should also look into that there are actually medical treatment. It seems to be something very good, but at the same time, no one really pay attention or, to help these disabled women who get proper medical care, at the same time to protect their gender, their women bodies as well. So I want to raise this issue. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions for the panel? Lani, do you have anything to say?
There's lots to say. I guess I've really thank you for bringing all these up. I think in terms of, that's why I think what I was talking, Carmen was talking about it, is about trying to build disabled women's voices, because these issues are issues that affect disabled women, and we've all been saying, they're not issues that are taken seriously by the disabled people's movement, like mainstream disabled people's movement. So this is what we kind of need to push. And I think as we I think in the UK, people are gradually getting to talk more. And I think things like, especially in the feminist, more in the feminist movement, is my experience, more in the feminist movement is beginning to open up around the issues around reproductive health and health, for disabled people, but disabled women in particular, and disabled non-binary people. But there's still quite a lot of work to do. It's kind of like people, it feels to me, or I observe anyway, that it can be difficult because we're not used in the UK. I feel in the dominant disabled people's movement, we're not often used to having those discussions, which are really about how our impairments operate and how like the personal experience intertwines with the structural. So that's the importance for me of a disabled women's organization, is our focus on those things, and kind of saying it's not about doing things in a, like, we need to find different ways of doing things, different ways of advocating for each other. And I know that Rona was talking about being your own best advocate, and I think I kind of echo that. But I think when you're facing structures of ableism and racism and gender, like discrimination in healthcare, that's where we get to be like groups of people advocating, and also thinking about reform of the healthcare system. I think in the UK, we've got the NHS, which is brilliant. It's brilliant that we have free healthcare, but it's often there is also a lot that goes on inside that system that it needs to change, and I think there could be a bit more space made and around that than there is for the voices of people who experience that. So that's what was just what came up for me listening to everybody speak. And so thank you so much for bringing all these issues to the table.
If I can add one note, is one thing I think for Sister Safrida, and many people have expressed it, is the sort of solidarity and peer support that you can get from having a collective of disabled women that you can go to and you can just talk about, and they know exactly what you're talking about. Now, there is a question or a comment in the chat box from Sara Louise Willer. Do you want to speak, or shall I just read it out from the chat box?
Yeah, just a couple of things, because around sort of, you're talking about reproductive health and things, and I'm thinking about all the things around the margin, the fringe around that. So the gene editing and all the stuff that's around that at the moment. And also the amendment that was made in the UK to the Human Embryology Act, which basically was a response to a couple, a gay couple, who decided they wanted to have a deaf child because they were deaf. And as a result, they changed the law to mean that in IVF, you can't now, if someone like me, like someone with Waardenburg syndrome was in a petri dish, we wouldn't be selected. We'd be considered as undesirable because we have the possibility, we have genetically predisposed to being deaf, and that is seen as undesirable. So that was one way in which, although I can see why they brought the change in the law, it did actually mean then that people like me are being erased from the future from one way. And the gene editing, of course, is to eliminate people with problems like mine, people with mistakes like my genes. So it's kind of facing a future where people like me won't exist because we will have been eradicated, which I find that really confronting. I find that really odd, that it's almost a sort of eugenics via the back door. And that's something that worries me. And the last comment is, this sort of stigma and stereotyping in the UK is certainly in the UK, and I think worldwide really, around certain conditions and certain appearances is so rampant that the Scottish government have just released an advert where a person with a white forelock is shown to be the physical embodiment of lung cancer. So that's how they chose to depict that and get that advert from YouTube. And I tried the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I pointed it out to them and I said, look, you know, I even made a video of me talking about it, saying, you know, there was a little girl who had albinism and she went to a nursery and a child said, oh, you're like Elsa, which is brilliant. But now children with Waardenburg syndrome may encounter discrimination based on this Scottish government advert supposed to be about health, because kids are going to turn around and go, you're like lung cancer. But in the UK, that sort of level of discrimination still seems to be absolutely okay, and it's being advocated by the Scottish government at the moment. And there's no organisation, the Equality and Human Rights Commission came back and said, we've looked at our algorithm for deciding whether it's worthwhile us picking this up, and we think that it's a very small group of people that will be discriminated against because of this. So yeah, so anyway.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe a small group of people, but discrimination is still discrimination.
Well, that's what I felt. Yeah, especially if children could be, you know, potentially stigmatized and bullied and made to feel that they are the physical embodiment of lung cancer, when there's no relationship between lung cancer and having a white forelock. So I thought it was worthwhile trying to pick it up, but I tried the Albinism Society and I tried the Human Rights Commission and got nowhere. And you know, a few people have seen my tweets and things and gone, oh yeah, that's awful. But other people are still persistent, because in lots of films, so many films and TV programs, we have a white forelock, you this evil, tragic character. And it's just a genetic condition. There's 2 or 3 genetic conditions that can cause it. So we're quite far behind in the UK, I think. I don't know whether there are any other countries where it wouldn't.
Can we hit a break now, because I think that this is an access issue, because some people might need to have a break. And we'll come back with breakout rooms. Now, all panelists are welcome to come to the breakout room if they so wish. But I would ask for those who want to have the BSL interpreter to let us know, or to let me know, so that we can make sure that you are in the breakout room with the BSL interpreter, or the people who need captions. I think, Rona, you need captions. So please, can you message me or message us in the chat box, and we'll have Lani, is it a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break? I'm sorry, I've forgotten.
On the program, we've got 15 minutes, so I think we stick with 15 minutes. I know we're running behind, but yeah, maybe stick with 15 minutes.
Yeah, because some people might need to eat, go to the loo, and all
that
stuff. So can you come back promptly at, it's now 1:04 according to my laptop. My brain's gone. So come back at
1:20. Yes, 1:20. I also wanted to add, if we can come back to the issue that Mali mentioned about how we're trying to become more inclusive at our orgs. I think that is a good point, and I think that could be an enriching conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. I think it should be from the participants. I know we've set up like 2 questions, but it's also up to the participants to decide what their room really want to discuss. And there are not that many of us, so we're gonna only have 2 rooms, if that's okay. Okay, have a good break, everyone, and come back at 1:20. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send it to you. Okay. It's Zoom.
Do you want to pause the recording?
Yeah. Bethany.